Sean is one of our newer members, and he's going to be joining me to present the sermon today. Sean is an openly gay man who was raised in the Bible Belt. Some people think that Jacksonville is the buckle of the Bible Belt, but you could say a few other cities as well. He now lives in the Jacksonville area, and as Sean had mentioned earlier, is a proud Wiccan, pagan, polytheist, witch, and Unitarian Universalist with a unique and continuous spiritual journey. Please give him a warm welcome as he shares a bit of his life story and spiritual identity. Sean?
Hello. I hope you all have an excellent Father's Day today for those who celebrate. And I hope that everyone has a great Juneteenth and Litha/Midsummer Solstice later this week for those who celebrate. Since I'm speaking during Pride Month, there are so many things I wish to say regarding being LGBT+ in this incredibly heteronormative world of ours. However, I think it would be for the best if I was to start with my personal experiences in this world. Growing up, I always knew I was different. I especially knew that I was different because my favorite color was pink. I would walk like this. I was very effeminate. I was also a dancer. I'm pretty sure my parents knew as well at a very young age exactly how I was going to turn out. But I also, knew who I was because I started to develop crushes on other boys in my grade and such. And it was very difficult for me, considering the type of environment I was living in at the time. A city called Winston-Salem, North Carolina. A city in the Bible Belt with fundamentalist varieties of Christianity being very prevalent in the area. Growing up, I heard a lot that being gay is a sin or unnatural, or that being gay will reserve a one spot in the fiery pits of hell. I'm sure many others here have also been told that they are going to hell for being different before. Thus, me growing up in such an environment, I always felt the need to keep my gay identity a secret, keep it to myself, even though I was very blessed to have very socially liberal/progressive parents. I grew up with a lot of internalized self-hatred and shame, even though I have always been a pretty rebellious and defiant person. Growing up, I dressed very alternatively, thus scaring many people around me in the Bible Belt, which was always a good time. Even though I was like that, I still felt the pressures of society. Even though I knew I was gay at a very young age, I did not come out to my parents until I was 16, which may seem like an awfully young age for some people here. But for a teenager, at least 5 years of keeping something so important to oneself is indeed a long time. I moved to Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, not too long after I came out to my parents. We moved to Florida to be closer to family, specifically grandparents on both sides of the family, especially since my grandfather on my dad's side of the family had failing health issues and was dealing with Alzheimer's. Interestingly enough, religion/spirituality was never a big part of my life, at least not until I was in 11th grade, shockingly enough, at Ponte Vedra High School. Around then, I started attending youth services and youth life groups at a popular local church at the beaches. I even went to a Bible study camp event while I was at that church. Unfortunately, on my end, I was not cautious, nor was I wise enough to check whether the church was accepting and affirming or not before I started getting involved with the church. I faced debatably homophobic harassment by my life group leader, and for some reason, I tried to look past the situation. For some reason, I tolerated such behavior. My breaking point was when, one day, there was a service after Christmas, and the main pastor was at the youth service to answer questions that people left in the basket at the previously held Christmas party held by the church. And of course, the first question, can you guess? The first question was, what does the Bible say about homosexuality? Rather than giving a mature, in-depth, nuanced response about the complexities of the Bible and how it was made, instead he chose to give a simplistic answer that didn't really even answer the question at all. He basically said that everyone struggles with sins, even people at the church, thus basically calling homosexuality a sin. That was when I stood up right in the middle of the Q&A service and left. I almost never went back after that. I even had a phone conversation with the pastor's son, the youth pastor, about me offering to go up on stage at next service to provide my point of perspective on the topic. I was denied, of course, and I was told that it was their church, not mine, and that basically they were a fundamentalist church that follows the Bible at a very shallow, extremely surface level value. Right around when all of this happened, I was deeply emotionally harmed, even though I was in the right. These situations at the church impacted me so much that I even tried praying to God that He would make me straight. I was even considering self-harm at the time. I even questioned my very worth and dignity as a human being. Just goes to show you, no matter how educated one is on a topic, no matter how strong one's convictions are, no matter how rebellious or defiant one is, just about everyone is at least somewhat susceptible to societal and communal pressures. On a slightly different note, ever since I was much, much younger, I had a fascination with anything misunderstood or anything different, thus why I dressed in emo or gothic attire. This is also why I became interested to learn more about Wicca. After leaving the church, I also decided to leave Christianity in order to further pursue and learn about Wicca. For a while, I basically did not know much about Wicca until I visited Earth Gifts, which is a local metaphysical store in Jacksonville. Then, after going to the store, I asked about covens in the Jacksonville area. I was referred to some local groups that were of the Correllian nativist tradition, which is a Wiccan denomination. Once I started to learn both about Wicca and Christianity and more in depth, I started to see that my values and personal beliefs were much more in alignment with Wicca than Christianity. I then eventually found one of my current spiritual homes in the Compassion League Temple, which is a local Wiccan temple that is associated with the Aquarian Tabernacle Church, which is a Wiccan denomination/organization. Another spiritual home that I have found is at Unitarian Universalist Church at Jacksonville. I first learned about Unitarian Universalism a while ago. However, I never attended a UU church often, at least not until recently. I love the aesthetic of the church and how it is surrounded by nature. I love how outwardly accepting and affirming this church is, whether it be the pictures of gay couples on some of the pamphlets, the rainbow flags around the building, or the welcoming mantra at the beginning of every service. I love how welcoming the congregation here is. My boyfriend and I have even definitely felt comfortable enough to hold hands during service ever since the first time I even brought him to this church, and that is definitely something special. I am, once again, starting to feel very comfortable with both my gay identity and my spirituality simultaneously. I have now found a path that is pretty suited for me. Please keep in mind, though, that people go through different journeys, and most people's journeys are definitely valid. Whether one stays with the religion that they grew up with and learning how to best reinterpret one's faith in accordance with one's personal identity, or whether one finds a new religion or spiritual path, or whether one abandons organized religion or spiritual groups altogether. No matter which one of these paths one decides to follow, their path is valid. Whether you are Muslim and lesbian, Christian and trans, Jewish and non-binary, Hindu and bi, Buddhist and pan, or Wiccan and gay, you are valid. It is your path and your spirituality alone. People do not have to understand it in order for it to be valid. Religion and spirituality is all about one's personal relationship with the divine. Thus, we define our own religion/spirituality. It is your life. Don't let others define who you are. With all that aside, please do have a happy Pride Month. please keep in mind that Pride Month isn't just about celebrating the LGBT plus community, diversity, and the human rights that we have won so far. It is also about the continued struggle for human rights, legal protections, and social acceptance for LGBT plus people in this often hateful world of ours. Pride was started as a riot at Stonewall against brutal oppression. It was started by trans women, especially black trans women, and gay men fighting back against police seeking to enforce homophobic, transphobic, and generally oppressive laws of the time. In the spirit of Pride Month, I encourage everyone here to rebel, be defiant, be courageous, speak out against injustice, and so on, peacefully, of course. Blessed be.
Thank you, Sean, for sharing. Kevin, for coming as well. We appreciate the journey and appreciate being a part of your journey, and that's the importance of community. I want to express my appreciation to the Unitarian Universalist Association for resources that guided me as I developed my part of the sermon this morning. To go back in my story, my first work after college was as a counselor with teens and young adults at Covenant House shelters in New York, Toronto, Canada, Houston, Texas, and Honduras. It included working with males, females, transvestites, transsexuals who were being exploited in the sex trafficking business. In Galveston, Texas, the state hospital performed surgeries on infants who were born with two sex organs. Do you think they always got it right? They also performed surgeries on adults who were transitioning. I wonder if the state of Texas allows that anymore. Many young adults who came to the shelter had been abandoned by their families, did not have the support of their parents, like we've heard a little bit today. They were desperate to continue their hormone treatments because if they stopped, their bodies would develop antibodies that would disallow the hormone treatments to begin again. They sold their bodies to continue to pay for their medications and survive on the streets. Many of these young adults were among the first victims to die from AIDS, as no one knew what was happening at the time, and many of their customers would not use protection. In Central America, when a girl tested positive for HIV by the government health departments, they were then shuffled off to another country and given a new identity by organized sex trafficking rings. Were any religious organizations advocating for the rights or even the very life of these human beings? On the contrary, many religious leaders called AIDS the epidemic that God gave us as punishment in America and other nations for the lack of adherence to a supposed religious orthodoxy. This, of course, as many of the same religious leaders were themselves engaged in sexual practices that were outside of the orthodoxy of their faith. The novel, The Scarlet Letter, which many of you remember, is certainly a timeless reminder of the hypocrisy of that time. Many religious spaces are still not welcoming places for all people, especially when it comes to gender, sexuality, and sexual orientation. The Unitarian Universalist Association, along with a few other religious faiths, has striven to change that. But we go against a strong anti-LGBTQ plus current, and it's powerful. As Sean mentioned, there are important positive movements for rights in this country and around the world, but the forces are powerful. The death penalty is still the law in many Muslim-dominated and African nations. Although many mainline Christian denominations do not condone the death penalty for LGBTQ citizens, The Anglican Church, both here in the United States and in Africa, explicitly supports anti-gay policies, which tacitly support extreme laws and persecution. The Catholic Church continues to struggle with the reality that many of its clergy, and of course members, are gay. And yet sexual repression continues to trump acceptance of that reality. Conservative Jewish congregations hold on to centuries-old doctrines that consider anything but heterosexual relationships to be abhorrent to their God. Well, of course, the beautiful biblical story of David and Jonathan belies that narrative. The most recent split in the Methodist Church is indicative of the polarization of this country. Here's what's so sad. In a church whose founder, John Wesley, was known for his social conscience and justice work, the church has been overtaken by ideological politics that have outweighed the love of the community's own members, as Methodist congregations have literally put their head in the sand. It's not new. Many Southern Methodist congregations historically did the same thing against integration. We've been at the forefront to make sure that Jacksonville welcomes all members in our faith community. Welcoming means striving for radical inclusion and creating spaces that honor every part of our identities, backgrounds, and experiences. To respect the inherent worth and dignity of every human being seems to be a no-brainer for Unitarian Universalists. It is, after all, our first principle, and it's what Sean mentioned helped to draw him to our church. However, making others less than human has been a part of our culture since its inception. While a number of Native American peoples have been accepting and embracing communities, the immigrants to America, primarily from Europe, but also from other areas, brought their prejudices with them. Our Constitution determined that only 3/5 of blacks could be counted to determine the amount of people for congressional districts. Our Constitution enshrined voting and other freedoms for white men only, depriving all blacks and all women of their rights to be fully human. So is it a wonder that our own state of Florida has passed laws that deprive children, parents, and teachers to freely talk about being gay or lesbian or having gay or lesbian parents, to provide books that display tolerance, diversity, and acceptance, to outlaw the rights of parents to decide on the appropriate medical care of their transgendered children? These policies are driving families out of Florida to find safe places. And even though recently we saw in the court upholding the rational thought and freedom, as the courts have pushed back on laws against free speech in the schools, and just this past week, the blocking of legislation that denies parents and children the right to pursue their own medical choices. The governor's office has said they will appeal, so we're not out of the woods yet. It is ironic that there are many well-funded organizations, like Moms for Liberty. Now, you would think a name, Moms for Liberty, but they attack the very liberty that people want to have for sexual freedom. Yet Educated We Stand, a nonprofit organization, points out that Moms for Liberty have pushed on restrictions for teaching about LGBTQ+ issues, stifling important educational discussions, and promoting a narrow exclusionary view of our history. They've called for the removal of LGBTQ+ books from public libraries and school curriculums, citing baseless and harmful claims. They've tried to dehumanize and delegitimize gay and transgender individuals, treating their identities as ideological rather than personal. The Southern Poverty Law Center has designated Moms for Liberty as an extremist group, noting their use of social media to target educators, spread conspiracy theories, and promote harmful rhetoric against the LGBTQ plus community. So organizations and religious institutions that provide the rhetoric give the literal ammunition to people who might not be of sound mind or might be extreme enough to make a violent action. In the 1980s and 90s and 80s, the Unitarian Universalist Association started the Welcoming Congregation program, and that helped us to learn how to undo homophobia and later transphobia in our hearts and minds. We became a certified welcoming congregation under the leadership of former member Greg Hines and many others. The spiritual practice of welcome is very important to our faith. We don't just open our doors to people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. We intentionally value diversity of sexuality and gender and see this diversity as a profound spiritual gift. It's a gift to our church, it's a gift to Jacksonville, and it's a gift to Florida. Briefly, we take a look at this spiritual gift. We understand that definitions and labels can never encompass who we are as full human beings. The invitation I offer to you is to cross the divides of difference, take risks. Labels can be tools of liberation, but also oppression. It's how we use them. I encourage you, explore your own sense of self. What do labels mean for you? What language do you see that describes your own sense of self? Talk to people you trust about sexual orientation and gender identity. Give them safe space and ask them respectfully, what is true for them? And talk about the things that might confuse you or that you want to understand better. And build relationships with people who have different sexual orientations and gender identities from your own. Be respectful of each person's right to privacy by asking open-ended questions to learn more about how they experience the world. We have a reaffirming renewal of our welcoming congregation, and over the next year we will work on that to make sure we're doing everything we can to be intentional about being a welcoming community, incorporating in our services Pride Month and other observances that are important. Being welcoming in our religious education and supporting a welcoming project like we were in Fernandina Beach for the Pride Parade just recently. As been said often, rights are not guaranteed. They are fought for and they are won. Martin Luther King told us, history will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. I think what Martin Luther King might say today is that Muslims, Catholics, Protestants, Hindus, Jewish, humanist, atheists, we must all continue to stand by the rights of others. We cannot continue to simply stand by as institutions, which many people belong to, promote bigotry and exclusion. As your lay minister, I'm committed to support initiatives over the next year that ensure that we are spiritually welcoming and are the community we strive to be, that we promote the dignity and worth of all humans through our social justice, both here within our community and in the world. We either stand together for each other or we all fall to the tyranny that will take away our freedoms one by one. Thank you.